The Emperor of Mankind stood before his thunder warriors at Mount Ararat in 669 M30 and gave a speech. He acknowledged what they'd done, unified Terra, ended centuries of factional butchery, handed him a planet and everything on it. Then he walked away. The Adeptus Custodes, his personal bodyguard, opened fire without warning. The lore describes it with blunt precision. The skies above the mountains started to glow as thousands upon thousands of bolt guns and guardian spears tore into the stunned Thunder Warrior ranks. Stunned. Not charging, not defiant. Stunned. After everything, the betrayal arrived with no signal, no buildup, and no warning. They were mid-celebration. That was the first time. It wouldn't be the last. The Emperor of Mankind has been defended by loyalists and lore analysts for as long as the fiction has existed. A tragic god king. A man who made impossible choices for the survival of humanity. A being too far above mortal comprehension to be judged by mortal standards. That argument has genuine structural weight, and it will get its full hearing here. But the confirmed record, named characters, documented orders, two-phase extermination campaigns, a cover-up buried in the imperial palace, kill ratios, false official histories, and a pattern that repeated across 3 armies over 10,000 years tells a different story. This isn't a character assassination. The facts are the exhibits. They've been sitting in the vaults since 669.M30. You render the verdict. Start with what the Thunder Warriors actually were. They were the Emperor's first superhuman army, genetically engineered from scratch, created for a single purpose, fighting the unification wars on Terra. They were extraordinary by any measure, faster than ordinary humans, stronger, capable of absorbing punishment that would kill a baseline soldier 3 times over. They cleared Terra, continent by continent, engagement by engagement, until the last armed holdout collapsed at Mount Ararat. They gave the Emperor his foundation. Everything that came after, the Space Marine legions, the Great Crusade, the Imperium itself, was built on what the Thunder Warriors won. The Emperor hadn't designed them to see any of it. Their genetic code contained artificially limited lifespans to ensure they would live long enough to see Terra conquered, but not much longer. That's directly from the established lore record. They also suffered from uncontrollable bloodlust and metabolic collapse. These weren't manufacturing defects discovered after deployment. They were engineered features. The Emperor built the termination date into the blueprints. The disposal of the Thunder Warriors at Mount Ararat wasn't a decision made under pressure at the end of the wars. It executed a specification written before the first battle. The speech before the massacre is described in lore sources as a cold declaration of the loss of a useless tool, not gratitude, not honor. The formal acknowledgement that a piece of equipment had fulfilled its function and could now be discarded. He gave that speech, walked away, and his custodes did the rest. The skies above the mountain started to glow as thousands upon thousands of bolt guns and guardian spears tore into the stunned Thunder Warrior ranks. What followed the shooting reveals as much as the shooting itself. The Emperor gave an explicit order that the massacre be kept hidden, the evidence buried deep within the vaults of his imperial palace, the event never spoken of again. The word used in the source record to describe what was being hidden is crime. And he didn't just suppress the event, he replaced it. A Thunder Warrior named Eric Tyrannus, given the title the Lightning Bearer, was officially recorded as having raised the Emperor's banner at the moment of victory at Ararat, then dying of his wounds. A fabricated death for a fabricated history. The real events went into the dark. The manufactured narrative went into the imperial record. That was Phase 1. Phase 2 makes the case harder to walk away from. Not everyone died in the opening volley. Ushotan, commander of the 4th Legion of Thunder Warriors, the Iron Lords, survived the massacre. What he chose to do with that survival is the prosecutorial detail that loyalist defenders almost never engage with directly, because it dismantles the framing of the Thunder Warriors as simply unstable weapons rather than people. He didn't march on the emperor. He didn't attempt to seize Terra or call for a counter-unification under his own banner. He allied with Grand Provost Marshal Uwoma Kandawire and a coalition of dissident figures within the nascent imperium, and he launched what became known as the Imperial Palace Coup. His stated goal, confirmed explicitly in the lore record, wasn't to overthrow the emperor. He wanted to arrest Constantine Valdor and put him on trial for what happened at Ararat. A man who watched his entire legion cut down from behind chose the legal process over revolution. He wanted the executioner held accountable, not the emperor removed. That distinction is worth sitting with, because it tells you exactly where the Thunder Warriors' loyalty sat, even after the mountain. They weren't anti-emperor. They were asking a question the emperor had decided could never be asked publicly. The emperor's response to that question was to deploy approximately 10,000 prototype Space Marines from the 1st Legion, the force that would later be known as the Dark Angels, in what lore identifies as the first combat deployment of the Astartes. His newest soldiers, never yet blooded, used to suppress the last surviving remnant of his previous soldiers. Then he sent Constantine Valdor personally. Valdor, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes and the Emperor's most honored warrior, killed Ushoten in single combat. He eventually impaled Ushoten with his Paragon spear, pinned him, and slammed him down into the ground, breaking his spine. Ushoten's last recorded words were characterized in the source record as expressing pity for Valdor's lack of humanity. Dying on the ground with a broken spine, killed by the man he'd tried to put on trial, and he spent his last breath on compassion for his killer. Ushoten's coup had been directed at justice, not revenge. He had fought not for himself, but for accountability. And he died while pitying the man who'd carried out the original crime and now finished the job. The Emperor's most trusted warrior, the man who embodied everything the Emperor supposedly stood for: excellence, loyalty, capability beyond measure. He personally ended the last Thunder Warrior commander after the Unification Wars were won, during the suppression of an armed coup Ushoten had launched to demand accountability. Within the walls of the Imperial Palace, the story still doesn't end there. Scattered Thunder Warriors who'd survived the coup suppression eventually appeared on a penal colony with approximately 3 million inhabitants, where they aided a rebellion. The Emperor chose which legion to send. He selected the Warhounds, the force that would later be renamed the World Eaters. He chose them not because they were the most tactically efficient option available. The lore is explicit about the selection rationale. The Emperor chose the Warhounds because they were among the most brutal and savage legions. Not surgical, not proportionate, not humane. He sent the most violent force in his arsenal to a prison world. Every remaining Thunder Warrior died in that campaign. They didn't surrender. Each one took 3 to 5 Warhounds with them before going down, a kill ratio confirmed at high confidence in the source record. These were already condemned soldiers, hunted on a penal colony, and they extracted a price that staggered even the legion the Emperor had specifically chosen for savagery. 2 phases: a massacre after a speech of acknowledged obsolescence, a targeted extermination campaign using the most brutal legion available, evidence buried in vaults, official history rewritten around a fabricated death. The last surviving commander killed by the man the massacre was meant to protect from accountability. One more detail before this exhibit closes. It's the one the loyalist argument struggles most to absorb. Despite all of it, the engineered lifespans, the Custodes at Ararat, the broken spine, the penal colony campaign, some accounts suggest the Thunder Warriors still loved the Emperor despite the culling. They loved him. Loving the person who ordered your death doesn't excuse the order. It deepens the crime. Because it means the Emperor didn't simply dispose of an unstable asset. He killed soldiers who trusted him, erased the evidence, and built a false record over the grave. Now hear the loyalist argument at its strongest. The Thunder Warriors were genuinely unstable. This isn't contested. Their uncontrollable bloodlust and metabolic degradation were real. An army of post-human soldiers with failing cognitive restraint becoming increasingly uncontrollable at exactly the moment the Emperor needed stability to build an empire from the wreckage of a unified Terra. That's a genuine and serious operational problem. A mercy-killing framing exists here that has real structural weight. The Emperor engineered the limited lifespans precisely because he knew the instability was coming. The disposal was preemptive management of a force that couldn't safely continue, not betrayal, necessary termination. This argument holds until Phase 2. A mercy killing doesn't require the most brutal legion available. Necessity doesn't pick its executioners for savagery. If the disposal of the Thunder Warriors was genuinely about controlling an unstable force before it caused harm, the Emperor had a third option he demonstrably chose not to take: deploy them into the most lethal theaters of the Great Crusade, which was already being planned. Give them the worst engagements. Put them on the front edge of the hardest campaigns. Let their engineered limited lifespans run out in service rather than in a surprise massacre. They were going to die anyway. The question was whether they died fighting or whether they died facing a sky full of their own side's weapons. The Emperor was simultaneously planning to reconquer 1,000,000 worlds. He needed expendable shock troops for the worst of those campaigns. He had a force of superhuman warriors with no future who would have charged into any engagement he assigned them because, as some accounts characterize it, they loved him. The third option was available. He chose the speech on the mountain and the custodes with their bolt guns. And when some survived, he chose the World Eaters. The Steel Man argument stands against Phase 1. Phase 2 breaks it. What the Emperor built next would eventually rhyme with what he'd just finished. The Space Marine legions were the corrected version, genetically superior, psychologically conditioned, physically capable of sustaining campaigns across decades. The Emperor's second attempt at a superhuman army, drawing on everything the Thunder Warriors had revealed about the first attempt's limits. Except analysts and community sources characterized the Legion creation process as one where the Emperor demanded production at a speed that concentrated emotional and physical flaws in the resulting warriors. The World Eaters' uncontrollable aggression, which had made them useful against Thunder Warriors, became unmanageable in the heresy's run-up. The Night Lord's psychological deterioration, the dark currents running through several legions from their earliest deployments. The Emperor had seen one army's instability end in massacre. He built the next army under conditions that accumulated the same risk, just on a longer timeline, with a slower accumulation and a catastrophic detonation. The heresy consumed the legions. The pattern didn't require a massacre at the end. The legions tore themselves apart. The Emperor presided over the same structural outcome through a different mechanism. Here, the confirmed record ends and the contested territory begins, and the distinction matters for the credibility of everything that follows. Horus Lupercal, War Master, the Emperor's most trusted son, the man who had carried the Great Crusade forward on his shoulders, who embodied everything the Emperor had built the legions to produce. He turned, and the reported trigger for that turn involves a location called Moloch, where Horus allegedly witnessed a vision of the Emperor bargaining with the Chaos Gods, making a deal he had no intention of honoring, using the darkest powers in the galaxy as a temporary tool, and planning to discard the agreement once it served its purpose. This event isn't confirmed canon. That needs to be stated plainly. The evidence record on the Moloch claim sits at a confidence of 0.40, which is essentially uncertainty, not verification. What Horus saw, if he saw anything at Moloch, may have been truth. It may have been a fabrication engineered by the Chaos Gods with precision, designed to break the one man who could stop the Emperor's project. The Chaos Powers would have known exactly what vision would crack Horus specifically, and a vision of the Emperor using and discarding a bargain partner, treating an agreement as a temporary tool, would have mapped directly onto patterns Horus had seen or suspected. The Thunder Warrior massacre is confirmed history. Moloch is the extension the audience takes from that history. But Horus, as someone who possibly glimpsed the logic of Mount Ararat, the emperor's template for building tools with expiration dates built in, using them to their limit, then discarding both the tool and the evidence, is a reading that doesn't require Moloch to be true. The evidence for the pattern existed in the imperial vaults, buried on his explicit order. Horus may have found threads that led toward the same conclusion the confirmed record supports. He may have been manipulated into catastrophic action on the basis of a manufactured revelation that echoed a real one, and his response, the heresy itself, may have been both catastrophically wrong and driven by something he correctly identified. Those three things don't cancel each other out. The post-heresy pattern is where the case closes its loop. The emperor was entombed on the Golden Throne. The legions were broken into chapters under Rabute Guilliman's Codex Astartes, his doctrine that no single force should be too large, too powerful, too centralized. The lesson of the heresy institutionalized. Disperse the forces, distribute the loyalty, never again build an army that could turn and burn an empire from the inside. Guilliman enforced that doctrine. He broke apart the legions that had survived. He distributed their gene seed among hundreds of smaller chapters. He made it the law. Then Guilliman came back. In the 41st millennium, he introduced the Primaris Space Marines, a new and superior strain developed by Archmagos Belisarius Call over what community sources describe as approximately 10,000 years of preparation under standing orders from Guilliman before his wounding. Though the exact timeline and standing orders represent general lore knowledge rather than a claim with a confirmed primary source behind it. Enhanced physiology, new capabilities, measurably better than the baseline Astartes by almost every metric. He introduced them at scale, not dozens, not hundreds, but legion-scale numbers, distributed across every chapter, whether the chapters asked for them or not. The man who had spent 10,000 years enforcing the doctrine that concentrated forces led to catastrophe built a concentrated force. He disbanded and basically broke apart the chapters, only to then later come to a solution that involved building what the Codex had specifically prohibited. The Magnificat organ. The enhancement pathway sold as the bridge between old and new, the offer of elevation rather than replacement, drew an immediate reaction from a significant slice of the audience that watches this content. At this point, the audience's own words are more useful than any original framing. The Magnificat stinks of an excuse to make the figures larger. Primaris exists to sell new, stronger models. That's verbatim from viewers. Whether Games Workshop's commercial priorities drove the lore direction or the lore drove commercial decisions is a question nobody here can answer with evidence the record hasn't verified. But the observation that the Emperor's pattern of building new, superior armies and inserting them to displace older ones became, 10,000 years later, institutionally useful, that's an observation the audience already made before this video started. 30 seconds on that is enough. The rest of the exhibit stands on its own. The table is set. In 669.m30, the Emperor built an army with engineered expiration dates, used them to win Terra, gave them a speech their lore record describes as a cold acknowledgement of obsolescence, and had his personal guard open fire on them from the sky. He buried the evidence in the Imperial Palace vaults. He constructed a false official record around a fabricated hero's death. When one commander survived and sought not rebellion, but judicial accountability, the Emperor deployed his first Space Marines and sent his most honored warrior to personally break the man's spine. When scattered survivors aided a prison rebellion, he selected the most brutal legion available, chosen for their savagery, not their efficiency. And the campaign ended with a kill ratio of 3 to 5 warhounds per Thunder Warrior. Every Thunder Warrior dead, and their love for the Emperor still documented in the record as having persisted through the culling. He built a second army under conditions that accumulated instabilities into the resulting warriors. Watch those instabilities detonate in the worst war the Imperium has ever survived, and presided over the same structural outcome through a longer fuse. The man who inherited the aftermath broke the legions apart on doctrine, then built a new one. 3 armies, 3 iterations of the same sequence: creation, deployment, disposal, replacement. Each one beginning with a promise of purpose, of glory, of an honored place in the emperor's design. Each one ending with the army's obsolescence, engineered before the first engagement, and the exit more brutal than the entrance. The loyalist argument requires that all three of these iterations were driven by genuine necessity, that each time the emperor faced an impossible choice and made the most painful but rational one available. The evidence the prosecution rests its case on is that the choice made at Mount Ararat, speech, then massacre, then cover-up, then targeted extermination using specifically brutal forces, isn't the shape of necessity. Necessity doesn't require the world eaters. Necessity doesn't require the vaults. Necessity doesn't need a fabricated hero to stand in for the truth. When a pattern repeats 3 times across 3 separate armies, each one built with the architecture of its own disposal already embedded in the design, what is the correct word for it? That question belongs to you. Subscribe for more stories like this.